Greetings everyone, welcome back to the channel. Believe it or not, I still read the comments on almost every ATA video, and over the years I've had quite a few requests for follow-up information on the cases that we've covered there. Now we're over 300 episodes into ATA, and finding the conclusion and context to all of these episodes would be really difficult and time-consuming, and just straight up impossible in some situations. In today's video, we're going to take a look at some of the more popular episodes of ATA that didn't necessarily have a resolution when we covered them, just try to provide some insight on where they are now. I may actually just start doing this from time to time on this channel, so be sure to check back every now and then. But like I said, this is kind of difficult and time consuming, so I'll get to it when I can. But without further ado, let's jump right in. The first episode we're going to take a look at was the case of Christopher Freedom Findler out of Arizona. You may remember him for being arrested inside Walmart for wearing a motorcycle helmet. I'm sure you all couldn't forget the professionalism, dedication, and service to his community that was on display by Officer John George of the Sarita Police Department. He was kind enough to berate and humiliate Mr. Findler and then unironically arrest him for disorderly conduct.
Laugh, but that's where we're at. So pull your head out of your ass and quit arguing every time somebody tells you something. I'm telling you, look at what you're doing. You keep wanting to argue with me. I'm not the guy you want to argue with.
Wasn't trying to argue. I'm just
That's
trying
why
to
you
state
keep
my
talking.
point.
Stop talking.
Okay, fine. Cool.
When we covered this encounter, the charges against Mr. Findler had been dismissed, and he had filed a lawsuit. The city and police department then offered Mr. Findler a $250,000 settlement, which he rejected, which led the city and the police department to file a motion of dismissal, and unfortunately for Mr. Findler, his lawsuit was dismissed on a legal technicality. Under Arizona law, specifically code 12-821.01, that entity or employee must be personally notified of the claim. So because Mr. Findler only served his notice to the town of Sarita and the Sarita Police Department and not the individual officers involved in the encounter, the judge accepted the motion to dismiss on these grounds. Mr. Findler appealed this decision, but it was ultimately thrown out. I know, legal technicalities really suck. They're oftentimes just complete bullshit, honestly, and certainly a far stretch from justice. But there is somewhat of a silver lining to this case. While he did dismiss the case against the officers, the judge ruled that the town of Sarita is not off the hook, and they can still be sued for vicarious liability, which essentially means that the town is responsible for the actions of its employees. So Mr. Findler continued to pursue that case, which is still ongoing. This case goes to show how long it can actually take to get any kind of progress in regards to police misconduct. There's a lot about our justice system that the charges against Mr. Findler were almost immediately dropped, but it has taken literal years for any sort of actual justice to materialize. And on top of that, none of the officers involved, including Officer John George, were punished in any way and are likely all still working for the Sarita Police Department. I wanted to show you this update first because it demonstrates how difficult it can be to actually follow up on these cases. Years can go by without any significant progress to speak of, and that's the case for a majority of the episodes on ATA. And I think it's just important for people to understand that whenever you're involved in a legal battle with the city or your local police department or whoever it may be, it can take a very long time to reach any kind of conclusion. Just be aware that justice is not swift in this regard, and it will be a legal battle with lots of red tape, many hoops to jump through, and a ton of technicalities and paperwork. Not to mention the financial burden. It can bankrupt you for losing your case. So just understand there are some serious risks involved with battling police misconduct. Not all cases are like that. Some actually resolve relatively quickly, and there are many factors that can contribute to that, whether it be social pressure or egregious conduct. This next case is one that did actually resolve relatively quickly. So last year, maybe the year before, we covered an encounter involving Pierce County Sheriff Ed Troyer and a newspaper carrier named Cedric Altamir in Tacoma, Washington. Sheriff Troyer had observed Cedric pulling in and out of driveways in his neighborhood at approximately 2 in the morning and decided it was a good idea to start following this guy. Bear in mind that Sheriff Troyer was not on duty, he was just in his home like any regular person. So eventually, after being followed for a while, Cedric got out of his car and he confronted the sheriff about why he was following him, not knowing at the time that he was speaking to the sheriff, a police officer. So the sheriff then called 911 and said that Cedric had threatened his life. Of course, this provoked a massive police response, which ended up with Cedric being detained before the police ultimately determined that nothing was really going on and let everyone go.
What are we waiting for?
We're waiting for them to talk to him and figure out what his side of the story.
What do we need to talk to him for? He's following me. Just because he made the call?
Yeah, because you are the two involved.
So if I would have made the call, you guys would let me go?
You are the two involved. So that's why we're getting
Involved in what? A car following me?
Yes, if it's
A sheriff? Somebody that has a gun on him?
If it's as simple as that,
But this interaction did prompt an investigation into Sheriff Troyer. When we left off our coverage of this interaction, Cedric had filed a $5 million lawsuit against the county, alleging that his constitutional rights were violated during this encounter. So Sheriff Troyer was eventually charged with making a false 911 call as a result of one of the investigations I mentioned earlier. His criminal trial began almost a year ago on December 6th of 2022. The jury heard testimony from Cedric himself. But ultimately, the jury found the sheriff not guilty of making a false 911 call. So most of the time when you have a criminal element involved in a case, the criminal element has to be resolved before any kind of civil action can take place. And oftentimes the outcome of the criminal case has a pretty big impact on the civil case. So for example, if someone got charged with like disorderly conduct, but they filed a lawsuit against the officer for some kind of constitutional violation, they would need to resolve that disorderly conduct charge first before they pursued the civil action. This information can have a big impact on the jury's opinion regarding civil matters. There are certainly exceptions to this, but it's important to consider how the jury is going to view the criminal elements of your civil case. It's not always crystal clear how a criminal case will impact a civil case, but it's hard to say that Sheriff Troyer's not guilty verdict was a good thing for Cedric's case against Pierce County. But ultimately, Cedric did settle the case and he was awarded $500,000. But like many cases, a stipulation of this settlement was that Pierce County did not admit any wrongdoing, which means that there will be no policy reforms or disciplinary actions or any kind of meaningful reform coming out of this case. And that's really the downside of accepting settlements like this. I'm not saying in this case in particular, but in many cases across the country that have the potential to set new legal precedents for how police officers interact with members of the public, they're oftentimes just shoved under the rug by accepting a settlement offer. In order for any meaningful reform to take place in regards to police interactions, there needs to be some legal cases that make it to higher courts that ask the hard questions about the relationship between the public and the police. Again, I'm not saying that this particular case was one of those, but it's just a trend that I've seen over the years. But anyway, let's get to the next update. Alright, so I'm sure that you all remember this one because it was pretty intense. But in case you forgot, this is former Rio Arriba Sheriff James Lujan. And this video was one of the craziest encounters I've ever seen, and definitely one of the craziest ones that I've covered on ATA. This is the episode where the local city police department was attempting to arrest the sheriff, who was refusing to comply with the arrest and threatening to use his officers against the city's police department. There are a lot of details and complexities about this one, so I highly recommend you take a look at my original coverage on ATA if you don't remember this one. The sheriff was eventually arrested for refusing to comply with a search warrant and for resisting arrest after he interfered in an investigation into one of his personal friends. He basically showed up drunk to an active standoff situation where his friend had barricaded himself inside of a home, and then the sheriff tried to convince the other officers on the scene his friend wasn't actually inside the house, and like I said, it's a whole sloppy and criminal mess. But when we last saw Mr. Lujan, he had been arrested by the Espanola Police Department. Since then, he's been sentenced to serve 3 years in prison, followed by a 1.5 years of probation for aiding a felon and intimidating a witness. I mean, not much to say about this one, really. It's good to see that justice was served and that Mr. Lujan is having to face the consequences that any other citizen would have had to face in this situation. Just wanted to let you guys know that he did go to prison, so let's move on. Alright, next up we got the case of Washington resident Mark Domino, who was violently arrested for not complying with an investigation after being suspected of stealing from his own car in the parking lot of the Walmart he worked for. A woman that was sitting in the parking lot called the Clarkston Police Department after she witnessed Mr. Domino peeking into the windows of a car before walking across the parking lot. She wasn't aware that Mr. Domino was looking into the windows of the car that his wife had driven to work because she also worked at Walmart. But Mr. Domino and his wife had worked different shifts that day, so he drove his motorcycle to work while she drove their family car. And of course, when Mr. Domino left the car, he was going to the other side of the parking lot where his motorcycle was parked. So she called the cops, and Officer Chris Lors arrived on the scene. Officer Lors confronted Mr. Domino, and it eventually escalated into a relatively violent encounter that ultimately led to Mr. Domino being charged with resisting arrest and obstruction.
You're gonna obey me, or you're gonna go on the ground.
Obey you?
Because I'm giving you a lawful order.
For what?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
Did I do anything?
Yes. Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
What did I do?
Do you want to get tased?
Excuse me?
Turn around and put your hands.
For what? Do you know I work here?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
Do you know I work here? This is my bike.
Okay.
So what did I do for you to approach me and then tell me that put my hands behind my back?
Sir.
What are you arresting me for?
I'm not arresting you. Right now you're not cooperating with me.
For what?
And you're getting agitated.
You asked me for my ID.
Right.
I don't have to give you my ID.
Okay.
Unless I've done something. What have I done?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
For what?
At first, Mr. Domino verbally agreed to a plea deal that stipulated that the charges would be dropped as long as he stayed out of trouble for the following 90 days. But he changed his mind about that a few days later and then decided to file a $5 million lawsuit against the city of Clarkston. So he decided to represent himself at both his criminal trial and in the tort claim against the city. And of course, the Clarkston Police Department's internal review board found that Officer Lors had done nothing wrong during the encounter. So the criminal trial stalled for a few months, and Mr. Domino's story got some support after being reported on by the local news and having some activists rally around him. On September 23rd of 2020, just about a year after the incident occurred, a mutual agreement was made between Mr. Domino and the city of Clarkston, where the charges would be dropped and he would be awarded a $25,000 settlement, and both parties accepted this. It's pretty safe to assume that this wasn't the outcome that Mr. Domino was hoping for. I'm glad he at least got some sort of compensation. I mean, if you watch the video, it does seem like he should have been more heavily compensated for this situation. And I wonder how different this case might have turned out if he didn't choose to represent himself. There's a saying within the law community, and it goes, an attorney who represents himself has a fool for a client. And of course, I'm not making fun of Mr. Domino in this situation. My point is that representing yourself to other people almost never goes well, especially if your case will go before a jury. It's very difficult to say positive things about yourself in front of a group of people and not come off as arrogant and narcissistic, and those kind of dynamics really do come into play in certain situations within the courtroom. So it's important to consider that and hire someone to represent your best interests. Not only that, but just the experience and expertise that an attorney offers their clients is well worth the money in most cases. In this instance, and the aftermath and context of this is sort of a testament to that. But anyway, we got one more update for you and then we'll wrap this video up. So let's get into it. All right, next up we have the Donner case. This is where Arkansas State Trooper Ryan Wingo crashed his patrol car into the back of disabled veteran Chris Donner's vehicle after executing a highly dangerous and legally questionable U-turn in the middle of a busy street. Trooper Wingo then proceeded to arrest Mr. Donner for disorderly conduct after he couldn't handle being confronted about ramming their car. But later he changed his mind and then decided to release Mr. Donner and only gave him tickets for following too closely and parking on a highway. The Donners eventually paid over $300 in fines. They said that they didn't initially fight the charges because they were too traumatized from their experience with Trooper Wingo, but the couple later did decide to hire an attorney and file a civil suit against the trooper, along with starting a GoFundMe to help with the legal fees. The Donners filed their case nearly 2 years ago, and no significant progress has been made. But they do have a new hearing set for February 1st of 2024. I am happy to report that the Donners GoFundMe nearly doubled their $20,000 goal, and I'd like to think that that's in part due to you all. Like I said earlier, cases like this can take a really long time to reach any kind of meaningful conclusion. But it's at least nice to know that the Donners do have the resources to pursue justice through their crowdfunding campaign. And I encourage more people to do this in similar situations. No one likes injustice, and most people are happy to donate at least something in an effort to seek justice for other people. There's no shame in asking for help in situations like this. They're extremely taxing. But anyway, I'm not going to go on a huge rant about that. That's all I have for you today. I sincerely appreciate you tuning into this video. Like I said earlier, if you like this style of recap video, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to update you as often as I can. And of course, I've got some ideas for different styles and formats of videos that I'm going to be trying out on this channel. And I'm always interested in hearing your feedback on that. Any subs, likes are greatly appreciated. I'm trying my best to grow this channel and focus on it a little more, and your support helps more than anything. Again, thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.